Students often have difficulty using semicolons correctly. One way we use a semicolon is when we have a long and possibly confusing list. You can see here that I have adjectives separated by a comma that are modifying the noun. So the items in the list are box, container, hoop, and dog. But if the only punctuation in the sentence were commas, there were no semicolons, it could be confusing to the reader. That's fairly straightforward. The other way we use semicolons is to separate independent clauses in a sentence, and that's usually where students have difficulty. We need to understand our terms first. A clause is a group of closely related words that contains a subject and a verb. It can have other words, it can have adjectives, adverbs, but at the very least it must have a subject and a verb. And for our purposes today, we need to differentiate between two types of clauses. One is a dependent clause, and that means if you take the clause out of the sentence in which it appears, and you put a period at the end of that clause, it is not a complete sentence. An independent clause, as the name implies, can stand alone as a sentence. You could pull that independent clause out of the sentence in which it appears, put a period at the end of that independent clause, and it would be a complete, full, proper sentence. Okay. Thus, because a semicolon is used to separate independent clauses in a sentence, it may be used only when both sides of the sentence can stand alone. If you put a semicolon in a sentence and you look on either side of it, both sides have to be full, complete sentences if they were taken out and left to stand on their own. Okay, I think an example might help. We went to the park and ate a lot of good things such as popcorn, cake, and ice cream. This is probably the most common way that the semicolon is used incorrectly by students. For some reason, when students use the phrase such as, they absolutely want to put a semicolon after it. But look at what follows the semicolon. This is not the kind of semicolon you're using in a list. There aren't semicolons between popcorn and cake, or after popcorn and cake. What you have then is this second half of the sentence. Look at it carefully. Can that stand alone as a sentence? Well, no, it can't. Popcorn, cake, and ice cream is not a sentence. It doesn't even have a verb. So you may not use the semicolon here. How do we fix this? Well, in this instance, no punctuation goes after such as. We went to the park and ate a lot of good things, such as popcorn, cake, and ice cream. Let's look at another. This is the second way that many students make errors with semicolons. After Peter opened the door, Grace was afraid. If you read that out loud, it kind of makes sense as a sentence. But when you read it on the page and you look at a semicolon, you'll see that the semicolon is not used properly. Now, Grace was afraid can stand alone. That's an independent clause. You could take that out of the sentence, and Grace was afraid will be fine. It's a full sentence. But look at this part. After Peter opened the door. That's not a complete sentence if you take it out and let it stand on its own. When we use a word such as after, there needs to be more information following in the sentence. Something like after Peter opened the door, the wind blew leaves in, or after Peter opened the door, my mother yelled at him to shut it. As it stands here, after Peter opened the door, that is not an independent clause. It's a dependent clause, so you may not use the semicolon. Often when I mark this on paper, students, when they correct it, just switch the two sentences around, or the two clauses around. Grace was afraid after Peter opened the door. But here you have the exact same problem. What comes after the semicolon is the same dependent clause. It cannot stand alone. So how do we fix it? Well, we have to add something to the clause after Peter opened the door. So here we have Grace was afraid after Peter opened the door, a rat ran inside. Both of these now are independent clauses. can stand on their own as a sentence. Therefore, this is correct. The other thing you need to keep in mind is the two independent clauses that are separated by a semicolon must be closely related in terms of the sentence topic. Cannot be two totally different topics. So sometimes I'll see an error like this. Grace was afraid, are you eating soon? Semicolon, that's an independent clause, that's an independent clause, but one has nothing to do with the other. So this is incorrect. Here is a correctly formulated sentence with a semicolon. The rain was quite heavy last night. It crushed my flowers. The rain was quite heavy last night is an independent clause. It crushed my flowers is an independent clause. The semicolon is located between those two independent clauses, and it refers to rain. When I mark your papers and I write run-on sentence as to note an error, one way to correct that error can be to put a semicolon in the sentence. Look at the sentence that I mark as run-on and see if it has two independent clauses. If it has two independent clauses, then separate those clauses with a semicolon and the sentence will be correct. But be careful. If you have more than two independent clauses, some students will have 3 or even 4 in one sentence. You can't just go in and put a semicolon between each set of independent clauses. It still is incorrect grammatically. It still is run-on. But if you have just 2 independent clauses that are closely related, put the semicolon in, and it's a way to correct a run-on sentence. Just remember both sides of the sentence have to be able to stand alone. Once you're sure you understand the use of semicolons, please watch my presentation on the related topic, the comma splice.